Today we're going to go through all the white cards in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan set to break down which cards I think will have the biggest impact in Standard for upgrading and creating new meta decks and budget decks. And we'll run through all these cards really quickly and I'll round them up with my favourite rare and budget cards at the end. I'll also mention any interesting synergies, potential combos, and cards to look out for while drafting as well, which will be useful to you if you use drafting to build out your collection at the start of each new set, like I do. So let's get into the white cards. Welcome back to the channel. We're going to break down all these white cards now, and in particular, we're going to look out for the two color archetypes that work well in this set, which are really good for building budget decks, but also really good in drafting. So the two color archetypes for white, the pairs are Artifact Control with blue, Cat Aggro with different pump spells with green. There are Vampire Sacrifice synergies with black, and a tapping mid-range strategy with red cards. So we're going to look out for those as we go through these cards now. And yeah, we'll mention all the rarities. We'll go through them just in alphabetical order all the way through the white cards. And let's see how quickly and efficiently we can do this. And so the first card we have is Abuelo's Awakening. X3 and a white for a sorcery to return target artifact or non-aura enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield with X additional +1 counters on it. And it's a 1/1 spirit creature with flying in addition to its other types. So there's some very interesting things you can do with this. There's in particular the white card that makes 3 times as many creature tokens whenever you make creature tokens. So making 3 of whatever enchantment or artifact you bring back is an interesting thing, but it just obviously depends which artifacts and enchantments we have in the set. That will be good to come back as creatures, plus everything else in Standard as well. You tend to not want things to come back as creatures if they don't need to, because they're easier to kill. But Go for the Throat is non-artifact creatures. Cut Down, or a lot of things only kill things when they have like lower toughness. And if you can put extra +1 counters on something, you can make it pretty big. I'm sure there are going to be some enchantments and artifacts that work really well with this. We'll have to see them as we go through. But yeah, so at the base, it's like 4 mana, return something from your graveyard, and it becomes a 1/1. So obviously, it depends on what extra things you get from that artifact or enchantment. But yeah, we'll look out for that. That's an interesting rare to start with. We've got Acrobatic Leap. 1 white mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying till end of turn. Untap it. A pretty basic, normal combat trick, but we'll see if it has some synergies with other cards in the set, more than just being a 1/3 kind of combat trick ambush card. Okay, we've got Adaptive Gems Guard. 3 and a white for a 3/3 artifact gnome creature. It's a common, and you can tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control, put a +1/+1 counter on the Gem Guard, and activate it only as a sorcery. So obviously you want to have as many artifacts or creatures as possible to put extra +1 counters on this. And this can work with the red and white tapping strategy, but obviously you have it can work well in white and blue decks as well. There's kind of a lot of artifact gnomes out there that we're going to see. So we'll see how this works with other ones. In fact, I think the next one coming up is the one that works well with it. Yeah, we've got Attentive Sunscribe, a 2 mana 2/2 artifact gnome. When it becomes tapped, you get to scry one. So Adaptive Gems Guard not only gets to put +1 counters on it, but if you have other things you want to tap, then obviously you get extra value. So you get to scry and put a +1 counter on it. It's only as a sorcery, the Gem Guard, so you can't do it like at the end of your opponent's turn, which would be a great time to do it, to tap things that you don't need to block with. If you're tapping on your turn, you don't get to block with them. Obviously, with Attentive Sunscribe, if you're just attacking with it, it taps and scries anyway. So you've got that even if you don't have the Gem Guard with it. We've got Bat Colony. It's funny because we had a Rat Colony in the last one. We've got 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. When a cave enters a battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So obviously, this works really well when you have lots of caves. If you're in limited, you probably won't pick up that many caves in your deck. So It's going to work better in constructed than in limited. And yeah, you want to go as wide as possible with this, making lots of bat creature tokens. It's a black creature token. It's a white enchantment, so it does give the signpost. This is probably for the white and black synergies in the deck, which are vampires, vampire bats. Makes sense. And yeah, when caves enter a +1 counter on target creature you control. It's not lots, but like I said, if you have lots of caves, then that can add up to quite a bit. We've got Clay-Fired Bricks, a 2-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic plains, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle and gain 2 life. Now, this by itself isn't that much difference to like the farmhand, the 2-mana 1/1 that searches for a plains, put it in your hand. That's all pretty similar, apart from this is an artifact, it's not a creature, and you gain some life. So there's not that much difference there. Obviously, if you have other artifact synergies and you don't need the extra creature out, then this might be better. And it also has the ability to craft with another artifact. So crafting is you pay an extra cost. In this case, it's 7 mana, and you exile this artifact and then another artifact you either control on the battlefield or is in your graveyard. And then you can transform this into the Cosmium Kiln. So the Cosmium Kiln enters the battlefield, creates 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens, and all creatures get +1/+1. So this is obviously better for a longer strategy, probably more of a white-blue in this set, because you're not going to get to 7 mana if you're doing a kind of tapping, aggro, slightly mid-range strategy. This is probably if you're going to want to ramp out, hit your land drops, gain some life, sustains you to a later game, you have lots of mana, and then you can create extra creatures and everything gets a boost. So yeah, it's an uncommon. It's 7 mana to do the artifacts, the backside of it. So it's quite a lot. So we'll see if, 7 mana. You can do a lot with 7 mana these days. So I don't know if 2 extra 1/1s that become 2/2s and boost your other creatures is necessarily amazing. If you have lots of other creatures, then maybe, getting that wedding announcement +1 kind of anthem might be a good thing. It's kind of hard to tell at the moment, but it's an interesting one. We've got Cosmium Blast, a 2-mana instant, deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. So it's a nice common. It can kill lots of things like Adelines. It can kill a Godric that's a 4/4 flying over your head. And obviously in this set as well, there's going to be lots of creatures that have 4 toughness. It's not the best, instant removal spell at the moment. We have Elspeth's Smite, which is a 1-mana 3 damage and exile something. The question is whether that 1 extra damage, the extra mana, will make a difference in standard. And it's when it's blocking or attacking, so it has to be engaging in combat as well. Would you rather have something like a Destroy Evil that can kill anything with toughness 4 or greater, and doesn't have to be attacking, and does other things as well? So yeah, it's probably not the best thing in standard, but be useful in limited when you have 4 toughness creatures. We've got Dauntless Dismantler, a 2-mana 1/4 creature, which is an uncommon. Artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and you can pay XX and white to sacrifice the Dauntless Dismantler to destroy each artifact with mana value X. So that's paying 3 mana to destroy everything with mana value 1, paying 5 mana to destroy everything or artifacts with mana value 2, and I guess the way this works, if I'm reading it right, you could just pay 1 mana. You're not paying any X cost. If X is 0, then you can destroy each artifact with mana value 0, which will be things like map tokens, treasure tokens. There'll be quite a few. The 1/1 gnome tokens all have mana value 0. That's one way to destroy lots of artifacts. So it's good against artifacts. There's nothing here that suggests this works in an artifact deck, apart from it's an artificer, which sounds like it should do. But yeah, you're going to have lots of artifact creatures. In limited in particular, knowing your opponent might have a white and red or a white and blue artifact synergy deck, being able to destroy artifacts and make them enter tapped so they can't do much on their first turn. It's going to be pretty good, probably in limited. Don't think it'll be that much in standard. We'll see. We've got Deconstruction Hammer, a 1-mana artifact equipment, where the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and pay 3 mana to tap it sacrifice the hammer, destroy target artifact or enchantment. It's only 1 to equip, which is nice and cheap. At the moment, we have Citizen's Crowbar, which I think with 2 mana automatically makes a creature and attaches to it, so you don't have to pay an equip cost. And then you can sacrifice it for less than 3, I think. 2, I have to look it up. But yeah, we have that already in standard. So this isn't any better. This might have been a replacement if that had rotated out. So if you're playing Alchemy, then maybe if you ever want to have a relatively cheap way of destroying artifacts or enchantments later on. But otherwise, nothing too exciting there. We've got Dusk Rose Reliquary. Now this is an interesting one. So it's a 1 mana artifact. You have to pay an additional cost to cast it of sacrificing an artifact or a creature. And it has Ward 2, which is nice. When it enters, you exile target artifact or creature the opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So it's like an ossification or a seal from existence or a borrowed time. It captures your opponent's creatures or artifacts. It doesn't hit planeswalkers, doesn't hit enchantments. And you have to pay this additional cost to get out. So you have to have another creature or an artifact to sacrifice to be able to pay for it. There are some ways of returning artifacts or other things from your graveyard without having to pay the additional cost. So the card at the beginning, where we can bring back an artifact or enchantment from the graveyard, comes as a 1/1 creature. And this could do that, but then you have a 1/1 creature that's only it has Ward 2, so it's kind of protected, but it's easy enough to kill. Although it's an artifact, which kind of makes it a little bit more difficult in standard. But I think it's a good card. It's an uncommon, which is nice. It's nice to have these cards that aren't, particularly costly in terms of wild cards. But this only works when you have artifacts or creatures to sacrifice. So in the white and black synergy, the archetype from this set, you should have some creatures or something to sacrifice to be able to cast this. So it's nice to have it for such a cheap cost. Okay, we've got Envoy of Okenek Ahau. I will pronounce things wrong because these have some interesting names that I'm not used to pronouncing. We've got a 3 mana, 3/3 creature, cat advisor, and the cats in the set are in the red and white synergies. So yeah, and you can pay 5 mana to create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. It's quite a big cost to make a 1/1, 5 mana. It's nice to have some mana sink later on. There might be some ways of reducing the cost of this. If you're in standard, you have things like, I don't know, training grounds that will make the activated abilities cost less. But yeah, 3/3, 3 mana that can potentially do something else. Nothing amazing by itself. So it's nothing too incredible with that one. Okay, we've got Fabrication Foundry, a 2 mana artifact. Now this is a rare, so it should be interesting. You can tap it, add 1 mana, spend the mana only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability of an artifact source. So that's nice. It's kind of a bit of ramp there. And for 3 mana, you can tap it, exile 1 or more other artifacts you control with total mana value X, and return an artifact card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So the Dusk Rose Reliquary, you can bring that back if you get rid of some other artifact you have on the battlefield that has at least mana value of 1, so it can't be a token. Then you can return the Dusk Rose Reliquary back and exile one of your opponent's creatures or artifacts. There are obviously going to be other things that you could do with this, so bigger artifacts you might have in your graveyard, and there are lots of ways to fill the graveyard in this set. So we'll see how well the Foundry helps make all these artifact things better. And just the ramp, maybe, just for the artifacts, is an interesting thing. Okay, so we've got Family Reunion, a 2 mana instant where you can choose to either give your creatures +1/+1 till end of turn, so a combat trick to finish things off, hopefully, or you can get creatures your control gain hexproof until end of turn. So potentially aggressive, potentially defensive. It's nice to have those 2 modes on the one instant because it depends if you're ahead and you have lots of creatures and you're trying to do your damage, you choose the first option. Trying to save something, you also have the second option as a backup. So pretty standard combat trick. Nothing too revolutionary there, but we'll see how that works with other cards in the set. Then we have a very interesting rare. This is Get Lost. It's basically will destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker, so not artifacts. And the controller creates 2 map tokens. Now it's a bit like Stroke of Midnight from the Eldraine set, where you give the opponent a 1/1 creature, and you can destroy pretty much anything for 3 mana. This is 2 mana, so it's better than Fateful Absence, which I believe is also a rare. Because that can only destroy creatures and planeswalkers, can't hit enchantments, and it gives the opponent a clue token so they can pay 2, sacrifice it, and draw a card, which is generally better than getting map tokens. The map tokens are interesting in the set, so they're artifacts. You can pay 1, tap it, and a creature you control will explore. And exploring is looking at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you can put it into your hand. If it's a non-land, then you add a +1 counter on the creature that explores, and you have the option of putting that non-land card into your hand or into the graveyard. It's a bit like a surveil. It only works when you have creatures that can explore, so if your opponent doesn't have any creatures, they can't use the map tokens. So that's one thing, but then it's extra artifact things they can tap if they need to tap them, or sacrifice if they want to sacrifice them. So there are some drawbacks to it, but 2 mana to destroy most things is a pretty good card. So I think this one's going to see a lot of play, probably in standard as well, because it's so versatile and cheap. Okay, we've got Glorifier of Suffering. It's a 3 mana, 3/2 vampire soldier creature. So vampire means it's going to be in the white and black archetype. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature or artifact. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So if you have other creatures, and if you have a creature or artifact to sacrifice, then this is 3 mana to put out 5 power, 4 toughness overall, but spread out over other creatures. So it's a really good rate if you have the things to make it work. So we'll see if we can make some draft decks that make the most of this. It's a pretty good card for a common. I'd probably take that if I have the vampire archetype going on. Okay, we've got Guardian of the Great Door. I quite like this one. It's an uncommon. It's an angel, and as an additional cost to cast it, just say it's a 2 mana 4/4 flying angel to start with. And if as an additional cost, in addition to the 2/2, in addition to the 2 mana, you can tap 4 untapped artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control. So the fact that it could be lands means you could be paying effectively 6 mana to get their 4/4 flyer, which is an amazing rate to get 6 mana 4/4 flyer. But considering you could also tap creatures, which is like convoking to get this out, and artifacts. So if your opponent's given you some map tokens, or if you have some map tokens, you can kind of use that to convoke or pay a cost. So this can effectively be a pretty cheap flying 4/4 creature. So I really like this, especially when you have ways that you can bring back low mana cost creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's going to make this even better. And our next card, which happens to just be in alphabetical order, but it's Helping Hand. It's a 1 mana sorcery to return a creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So obviously that works really well with Guardian of the Great Door because it's only a 2 mana creature, even though you could technically pay 6, and it's quite a big creature. So you can bring that back pretty cheap. Now obviously there's going to be other things in the set you can bring back that are cheap creatures that have a good rate for different reasons. But the Guardian is one of those that I think is really good. So that works really well with Helping Hand. Also, just 1 mana to bring back a creature, mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, is a really good rate anyway, because you have different ways of getting creatures in your graveyard. If your opponent kills your Adeline or whatever really good creature you have in the graveyard, you just bring it straight back for 1 mana. Even if it's tapped, it doesn't matter because you're going to get to use it on your next turn anyway. It just means it can't block on your opponent's next turn. If it doesn't matter, if that 1 block doesn't matter, you're basically getting a really good creature just for 1 mana. So Helping Hand's a great one, especially with that angel. Okay, so we've got Ironpaw Aspirant. It's a 2 mana 1/2 creature cat warrior, so it works well with the red cards. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you're paying 2 mana, you're effectively getting a 2/3 So it can put the +1 counter on itself if there's nothing else, but it has the flexibility to put it on something else if you would rather do that. It's nothing incredible, but considering it's a 2/3 for 2 mana, it's not bad to start with. And being flexible, putting the +1 counter in different places, I think makes it a pretty decent common. Okay, we've got Kellen, Daring Traveller. This is a rare and it's a little bit more complicated, but it has an adventure as well, like we've had in Eldraine cards. It has the adventure Journey On, which is a sorcery, costs 1 green, and you create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. So obviously, if we're playing this on Arena, you're going to have one opponent. You're not going to have more than one. So you can create one map token plus so X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. So you either create 1 if your opponent doesn't control any artifacts, and if your opponent does control an artifact, you create 2 map tokens. So pretty simple on Arena. If you're playing Commander or playing against multiple opponents, then it has a higher ceiling, more value that you could get from it potentially. But other than that, it's a 2 mana, 2/3, that when it attacks, you can reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So like I said, there's different ways of filling your graveyard and potentially bringing things back if you need to do that. Or there are ways that certain cards care about how much is in your graveyard, which we'll get to later on as well. So basically, you attack and you can potentially draw a card every turn. If you have a creature mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand, you're effectively drawing a card every turn you attack with it. Obviously, you don't want to attack with it and have it die, so it depends. If the opponent has a decent blocker out, you might not be able to attack. But even by itself, a 2 mana, 2/3 that can potentially at least draw 1 card, even if it does die when you attack with it, and also has the added value of the adventure, is nice thing to have, but it's a rare, so is it worth being a rare? We'll have to see how that gets used. And then we've got Kin Jali's Dawn Runner, a 3 mana 1/1, which sounds awful, but it's a human creature. It has double strike, which makes it not too bad. And when it enters the battlefield, it explores. That's looking at the top card. If it's a land, put it into your hand. If it's not a land, then you can leave it there or put it into your graveyard. So basically, like Surveil. So you can get a +1/+1 counter on the Dawn Runner. So it could be a 3 mana 2/2, which is much better. Obviously, having higher power on a double strike creature is twice as much power. So this could hit the opponent for 4 each turn if they can't block it or they don't want to block it. So yeah, it's okay. Obviously, you can get other +1 counters on this from other things, like the other creature we just looked at that adds +1 counters onto things. You can return it from the graveyard to the battlefield if it gets killed, if you have Helping Hand. So there's lots of things you could do with that. 3 mana for a 1/1 that potentially draws a land or surveils and becomes a 2/2. It's not incredible, but I think if you're able to add more +1 counters onto it and boost it in other ways, so maybe this will work well in the white and green deck if there's other ways to boost creatures, then that double strike is really going to make a big difference. Other than that, it's okay, it's not amazing. Okay, on to the next white cards. So we have Kutzil's Flanker, a 3 mana 3/1 flash cat warrior. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose to put a +1/+1 counter on itself for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn, which is great if there's been a board wipe or you've had to block lots of things. It's good to ambush as well because you can flash it in to block something if you want to kill something with 3 toughness, but you only get to add the +1 counter on it for each creature that already left the battlefield under your control. So chances are if you're ambushing your opponent with this, then it's not going to get, that value. But you can also gain 2 life and scry 2 if you need to, or you can exile target player's graveyard. So there are lots of things you can do here. Exiling the opponent's graveyard is a really interesting thing to do when you have different archetypes that care about how much is in your graveyard, or trying to bring things back, any reanimator type of strategy as well in standard. So yeah, having that ability, it's a if you're in standard and playing it's a mono blue Djinn deck that cares about how much is in their graveyard. If you exile the whole graveyard, make their Djinns completely useless. So there are different ways you can use this, which is really interesting. You could use it after wiping the board yourself, if you need to kill everything, and then throw this out, it becomes a big creature. Or when your opponent decides to wipe the board, you then put out another big creature to kind of start rebuilding straight away. So it's nice that it can do different things, and if either of those, the graveyard or the +1 counters, aren't relevant, you can at least gain 2 life and scry 2, which is pretty decent in itself. It is a rare, which it's nice that it has flash, and it's nice that it has different modes you can choose. Don't know if it's the best rare. We'll have to see. Okay, well, then we've got Malamet Warscribe, a 5-mana 4/3 cat warrior. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +2/+1 till end of turn. So this looks pretty good. Only a 4/3 for 5 mana, which is not the best rate, but it boosts your other things by +2/+1. If you have lots of creatures, that's probably going to be enough to do the final damage to your opponent. It's a shame it doesn't have haste, because if it had haste, it would come in as a 6/4, which would be pretty good. But yeah, it doesn't have that. So I don't know how much we'll see this work. It is kind of expensive, but it's a bit like Imadane's Recruiter, where you can boost everything. If you've got a wide board, this is going to make a big difference. If you don't, then it's an expensive creature that doesn't have very good stats. So you need to have a wide board for this to be any use at all. Then we've got Market Gnome, a 1-mana 0/3 artifact gnome. When it dies, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. And if it's exiled from the battlefield while you're activating a craft ability, you also can gain 1 life and draw a card. So 1 mana for a kind of okay blocker that can also gain your life and draw a card is a pretty good rate. And obviously it's made for decks where you're going to have different crafting synergies in there as well. So it's nice that you don't lose that extra 1 life and the card when you're crafting. So obviously it depends what other things we can craft with. But we've seen some already, and there will be more coming up. So we'll look out for different craft cards. Then we've got Might of the Ancestors, a 3-mana enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, a creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains vigilance till end of turn. It's nothing huge by itself, but if you have, I don't know, a big flyer, make it stronger. If it can't be blocked, it's got menace. If it's a decent creature to start with, and it's doing a good job of attacking, attack through, and you want it to defend as well, or you're worried about things that can target your creature when it's tapped, then giving it vigilance is useful. It's nice you can get this every turn, because if you have an enchantment, if you have an aura, it goes on your creature and just gives it a boost. If your opponent kills that creature, you lose the aura. This is nice because it can choose whichever creature you happen to have out. So even if that creature dies, you put out another one. But a 3-mana enchantment, I don't know, for an extra +2 in vigilance. We'll have to see how well that plays out, but it's hard to say if that's going to be particularly good. You tend to want to, do things that are going to affect the board a lot more on like turn 3. If you can only make something +2 and have vigilance on turn 3, then you must have to have a good creature on turn 1 or 2 for this to make a difference early on. So I don't know. We'll see how that works out. Okay, then we've got Miner's Guidewing, a 1-mana 1/1 bird. So it has flying, it has vigilance, and when it dies, you can choose another creature you control to explore. So draw the land, or put a +1/+1 counter on it, and put a creature into your graveyard or back on top of the deck. If it's a non-land, so it doesn't have to be a creature. Okay, so 1/1 flying vigilance is okay to start with. It's nice to get that damage through every turn, and that extra value when it dies. Obviously, you have to have another creature out at the time for it to do the thing. So potentially, pretty good rate and a decent creature that could trade for, small things or things with lower toughness. Nothing exciting, but it looks okay. Then we've got Mischievous Pup, a 3-mana 3/1 creature dog with flash. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 other target permanent you control to its owner's hand. So there are lots of different permanents you could have in the on the battlefield. Now this is also doesn't say non-land, so it can be a land. If there's any reason why you want to return a land from your battlefield to your hand because it's one that transforms, or because it's one that does something when it enters, then you can do that, which is quite nice. And it can just be something your opponent is targeting to remove. If they're trying to kill your creature, you put out the pup. The pup saves the creature, puts it back into your hand. You can play it out again. Or just anything with a good enter the battlefield ability, because you get to get that value again. So it's nice that you can do lots of different things with this. It's nice it has flash as well. So I quite like this uncommon. Nothing game breaking, but nice synergies if you have the right things. Then we have Oja Tak Deepest Foundation. I probably said that wrong, so I'm just going to call it Deepest Foundation. It's a 6 mana legendary creature god. It's a mythic. It's 6/6 with vigilance, and if one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many are created instead. And when it dies, you get to transform it, and it will come back as a Temple of Civilization. It's a land, just taps for white mana. But you can also pay 3 and tap it to transform it back into the original creature if you have attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn. So obviously, this only works if you have lots of creatures, and it's designed to help you make lots of creatures as well. So you could imagine this with something like, I don't know, Rabble Rousing. You attack creatures and you make 3 times as many. There's things you could do with Ginny Fey to make, those kind of things work like crazy. But also, I don't know, Skrelv's Hive, making 3 creatures at once. There's different things that will make. There's gnome tokens that could be made here. There's that card at the beginning that brings back an artifact or enchantment from your graveyard as a 1/1 creature. There are planeswalkers. This might work well in a kind of white control deck because you have planeswalkers like the Eternal Wanderer and the Wandering Emperor that can create those samurai creatures. They can make 3 of those creatures at a time. Then, that's crazy amounts of value. So yeah, lots of things you can do with that. There's lots of token white decks anyway, and white and black in this set as well. The question is, will it really see much play? We've got Mondrak at the moment, which is 4 mana, 4/4 that can potentially become indestructible. It creates double the amount of tokens. Now that's not just creatures, that's also like treasure tokens, blood tokens, whatever other tokens you make. This is only creature tokens. If we don't see Mondrak played that much, or that competitively, are we going to see Deepest Foundation played very much? We'll have to see. I think it has to work in a kind of bigger control deck because it costs more to get out. So you don't want to be trying to do kind of small creature synergies with this. This is probably a bit of a long game. So I like it. I'm going to use it. I'm going to try it out. Will it really see that much play? I don't know. When it dies, you get this extra value where you get to kind of ramp up to something more and can potentially bring it back. But if it gets exiled, it gets exiled. It didn't die, it won't transform. So you could still potentially lose this to any, ossification type card, or Sunfall would get rid of it. So we will see how that actually plays out. Okay, we've got Old Tech Archaeologists, a 5 mana 4/4 creature. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose to return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, which is okay, which is nice. If you don't have an artifact in your graveyard that you care about or don't want to return to your hand, you can also scry 3, which is a nice bit of value there. So 5 mana 4/4 that can at least scry 3. I think it's good. It's not incredible. It's not game breaking, but it depends what artifact you might have in your graveyard. Kind of like drawing an extra card if you've done an explore and put an artifact into your graveyard, or just been killed, you can bring it back. Nice bit of extra value. If it's a really good artifact card, then obviously this is really good. Without that, it's not incredible. Okay, we've got Old Tech Cloud Guard, a 4 mana 3/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you create another 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. That's kind of 4/3 in terms of stats for 4 mana overall, over 2 bodies with 1 that's flying, which I think is a good rate, especially if you have something that benefits from extra tokens being created. Maybe making 3 gnomes instead of 1. Probably wouldn't use that with Deepest Foundation, but if you did, extra value there for you. Yeah, I mean it's okay, it's good. I'd use it in draft games. Probably won't see any play in standard or be relevant in standard. But it's a soldier. Soldiers can be relevant creature types right now. And then we've got Oteklan Landmark, a 1-mana artifact that enters the battlefield by scrying 2, which is nice value for 1 mana. And obviously, then you have an artifact on the battlefield that you can craft for 3 mana, exile it, and 1 other artifact you control, either from your battlefield or the graveyard. And it becomes Oteklan Levitator, a flying creature that when it attacks, another target attacking creature without flying gains flying till end of turn. It's a 1/4, so it's not hugely aggressive by itself. But if you have something like a bunnycorn or some other creature that gets really big, then obviously this can help that get over the opponent if they don't have reach or they don't have flying by themselves. 1 mana scry 2 with a bit of extra value later on to at least become, a creature, a flying 1/4 for 3 mana. I think it's nice to have those two different things you can do there. And if you have, like I said, other creatures that could benefit from flying, then it's going to be a really nice common card. I think it's pretty good. Okay, we've got Petrify, a 2-mana enchantment aura. Enchant artifact or creature. It can't attack, block, and activated abilities can't be activated. So it's a bit like the Pacify of the set. There's nothing incredible. Activated abilities can't be activated. Will stop things from being crafted. So if you have the this card here, if your opponent has a landmark, you can petrify it, which will stop it being able to craft. So that stops that activated ability, which is nice. But apart from that, it's just pacify. Nothing exciting. Okay, we've got Quicksand Whirlpool, a 6-mana instant. It costs 3 less if it targets a tapped creature, and you can exile target creature. So 6 mana to exile any creature, 3 mana to exile a tapped creature. It's okay. I mean, it's not. There are better ways of getting rid of creatures, I guess. I really wouldn't want to pay 6 mana to exile one thing, but yeah, your opponent's going to have tapped creatures at some point if they don't all have vigilance, and not everything's going to have vigilance. So I guess exiling something like if they're attacking with the 6/6 Deepest Foundation, you can exile it and it doesn't die, so don't get the extra value from it. So exile is valuable in this set, but I don't know if it's that valuable that we want to pay 6 mana to potentially exile anything. We'll see if that actually becomes good. Then we have a really, really nice card. We have some mythic rare. It's a 3-mana, 3/3 angel, and I do like angel cards. It has flying, and at the beginning of each end step, so that's your end step and the opponent's end step, if you gained 5 or more life this turn, create a 4/4 angel creature token with flying and vigilance. And you can pay 6 mana to give the resplendent angel +2/+2 and lifelink, so it can gain that 5 life itself if it's attacking. And then you get to create the 4/4 as well. This is a reprint. It was in core set 2019. It's I probably have some on my account already. So the duplicate protection thing, which is slightly different with reprints, will come into effect, which I can explain in another video. But it's a good creature, 3/3 flyer for 3 at the very least. If you have it in a life gain strategy, then you're going to get extra 4/4 angels. Essentially, like once on your turn, once on the opponent's turn, if you have other big lifelink creatures or other ways of gaining lots of life. So a really nice card. If you see this in draft, I'd pick it up. It's good in Explorer. It's good in in Standard. It's going to be really good. There are lots of really good Angel cards in Standard already. So yeah, I would definitely want to add this one to that deck. Okay, we've got Ruin Lurker Bat. It's a bat, so it's going to be in the black-white synergies. It's a 1-mana, 1/1 flying lifelink. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, scry 1. So descending is any permanent card being put into your graveyard from anywhere. So milling, surveilling, anything being killed. It also includes things like treasure tokens being sacrificed. They technically go to the graveyard, even though they don't stay there. So there's lots of ways to descend. And if every turn you get to scry 1, that's really useful. And a 1/1 flyer with lifelink is a nice creature that your opponent might find kind of annoying if they can't deal with flying creatures. So, a really good card, and yeah, in the vampire archetype of the set, I think it will work out really well as well. Then we've got Sanguine Evangelist, a 3-mana 2/1, which sounds not very good. It's a creature, it's a vampire cleric, so with the white and black synergies. It has Battle Cry, so whenever it attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 till end of turn. So it's nice if you have a wide board. You have lots of flying creatures, lots of bats, then that's going to help them get a lot bigger. And when it enters the battlefield or dies, it creates a 1/1 black bat by itself. So 3 mana isn't just for a 2/1, it's for a 2/1 and a 1/1 flyer, which is good. When you attack, that becomes a 2/1 flyer. And this is only Battle Cry only affects other creatures, so it won't make this a 3/1 when it attacks, unfortunately. But if you attack and it dies, maybe trading with something of the opponent's, then you make another black bat with flying as well. So a good bit of value there. This is a rare, so it's you're not going to see it that much in draft, but when you do see it, I'd pick it up. With the other cards, the other vampire cards in white and black, it could be pretty good. Okay, we've got Soaring Sandwing, a 6-mana 3/5 flying dinosaur. When it enters, you gain 3 life, which is nice, and it also has the plane cycling ability. So when it's in your hand, you can pay 2, and you can grab a planes from your library, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So this goes to your graveyard. There are ways to bring it back. But I really like these in draft games because it means you have a relevant creature later on. So it's nice to have a big creature, although a 3/5 flyer isn't going to necessarily turn the game around hugely. Harder to kill, but it's and it stabilizes, gives you 3 life, and it can potentially do damage every turn. The opponent might not have something decent to block with, so it's good later on in terms of limited, but not really in standard. And also, if you draw it early on, you can turn it into a land if you need to, if you're not going to get a chance to play it, or if you're not going to get enough land to get to 6 very easily. So I like these kind of cards in draft because they have the early game value if you need the lands and the late game value if you don't need the lands. So yeah, okay in draft, not really going to see much in standard at all. Then we've got Spring-Loaded Sawblades, a 2-mana artifact with flash. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target tapped creature an opponent controls. Whenever I hear 5 damage, I think of Shieldred. And yeah, so 5 damage to a tapped creature for 2 mana, which is nice. You also have the ability to craft with artifacts, so that's 4 mana to exile this and another artifact from your graveyard or from the battlefield to make the Blade Wheel Chariot. It's a vehicle, it's a 5/5 with crew 1, which is really good for a vehicle. And you can tap 2 other untapped artifacts you control to make this a creature instead of crewing 1. So you don't even need to have creatures to crew this. It could be that you have some treasure tokens that you just tap and they stay there because you're not tapping them for mana. It could be that you have some map tokens that you tap. So it's nice to have some different ways of activating this, and a 5/5 creature that you can turn on and off whenever you want to. It's pretty good. If your opponent has some removal, but they can only use it on their turn, or they don't have the mana to use it on your turn, then this is only a creature. While it's attacking, at the end of your turn, it becomes a non-creature artifact. If they can kill creatures, it might not be able to kill this quite so well. So 5 damage to something for 2 mana, and then 4 mana to be able to turn it into a 5/5 crew 1 vehicle. I quite like that. I think I can see this happening quite a bit in draft. In standard, I don't know. It depends how all these artifacts add up in standard, but at least in draft, I think it'd be good. Okay, then we've got Thousand Moons Crackshot, a 2-mana 2/2 human soldier. Soldiers are relevant. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 3 mana to tap a target creature. So this in the Ixalan set is with the red synergies because it taps things. And yeah, good bit of kind of tempo to tap the opponent's best blocker. You want to attack with this. Only a 2/2, so it's better when the opponent doesn't have many creatures, because tapping one of them isn't going to do much if they have other creatures to block this with. It depends what else is on the battlefield. But 2 mana 2/2 by itself is okay. Having this extra potential to block, to tap a creature that can't block is kind of nice. It's okay. We've got Thousand Moons Infantry. So this is a 3-mana 2/4 creature. Another soldier. When it you can untap it during each other player's untap step. So at the beginning of their turn. So it's kind of like having vigilance. You can attack, it taps, it untaps, so it can block. So similar to vigilance. But it's a 3-mana 2/4, which if you compare it to Adeline, which is at the very least a 3-mana 1/4 that becomes a 2/4 when it attacks, when something else attacks, and just gets stronger and stronger, and it has proper vigilance, not just untapping again on your opponent's turn, then obviously this isn't as good as something like Adeline, but it's only a common, so it's kind of like a really cheap version of it, and works well in a soldier deck. So, yeah, it's nice to have that as a blocker as well. Nothing crazy, but it's something that's okay. Then we've got Thousand Moon Smithies. This Thousand Moons thing is like, the red and white deck. So yeah, 4-mana legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you create a gnome artifact, a gnome soldier artifact creature token, where its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and/or creatures you control. So this enters if you have nothing else. 4 mana, it's making a gnome creature that is an artifact, and this is an artifact. So the gnome creature is going to be a 2/2 at the very least. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, so before combat on your turn, you can tap 5 untapped artifacts or creatures you control, and if you do, you get to transform it. So if you have lots of artifacts, then obviously it's going to be easy to transform this by tapping 5 things. And when you transform it, it becomes Barracks of the Thousand. It's a land, it's a legendary artifact land, which is kind of like funny types to have all in one thing. It can tap for white mana like normal, but also whenever you cast an artifact or creature spell using the mana produced by this land, then you create another white gnome soldier artifact creature token with power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control, which basically means it's very similar to Bunnycorn in a way, which will come out and be, have power and toughness equal to the number of non-land permanents you control. This only cares about, you know, artifacts and creatures, but the majority of the non-land permanents you control will be artifacts and creatures. And this is still an artifact as well, so even if you've lost the other gnome that it makes, if you cast any artifact or creature, you're going to get another gnome to replace it, which at the very least will be a 3/3 because you've cast another artifact or creature. You have this one, you have the gnome, that's 3 creatures or 3 artifacts. So I quite like this. It's a rare. Um, It's nice that it makes that creature that's at the very least a 2/2 when it comes out. 4 mana for a 2/2 would be terrible, but obviously if you've got all these other things that can add up, lots of other artifacts you could have, any other creatures is going to make Gnome a pretty powerful creature. So I quite like this one. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, right, now on to the last white cards. We have Tinker's Tote, a 3-mana artifact. When it enters, create 2/1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. And you can sacrifice this to gain 3 life. So, looking at the, the last card, this makes lots of. This is an artifact that enters that makes 2 other artifacts. So that's 3 additional power and toughness for the gnome soldiers if you have them. So, obviously, there's lots of things in this set that can really boost that. But 3 mana for 2/1/1 creatures and an extra 1 mana to gain 3 life is pretty good. I think as considering there are things that want to tap artifacts or care about the number of creatures or artifacts you control, and this is a nice thing to have. It's not great by itself, but it's a nice bit of support. And then we've got Unstable Glyph Bridge. It's a 5-mana artifact. This is a rare. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, so you can't cheat it out. For each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls, then destroy all creatures except creatures chosen this way. So if you're on Arena, it's just you and your opponent. You don't have more than one opponent. But basically, wiping the board and leaving just one creature that's got power, 2 or less for you and 1 for them if they have it. If you don't have it, if they don't have a creature with power 2 or less, then it destroys everything. If you have one, it keeps it. So it's kind of just basically a board wipe. with the potential to leave something behind. And then, obviously, it's an artifact which cares about other artifact synergies. And when you craft this, which is 5 mana, craft with artifact, it becomes the Sandswirl Wanderglyph, which is a 5/3 flying artifact creature, golem. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can't attack you or planeswalkers you control this turn. And each player who does attack you or a planeswalker you control now can't cast spells. So it's a really good control-y way of getting rid of your opponent's creatures. If you have planeswalkers, they're going to be left with like pretty much no creatures to attack them. Then your opponent has a hard time rebuilding because if they attack you, they can't cast spells. If they cast spells, they can't attack you. So it's going to keep you alive while they try and rebuild, or it's going to mean that they're kind of locked out and can't do anything. But that's on their turn, so they could still cast instants on your turn. They could attack on their turn, cast instants on your turn. But if they don't have that, it's really going to lock them out. So this is a really, really good card for the white and blue artifact control, having a board wipe and a potential pretty aggressive creature that also stops the opponent doing things on their turn is, yeah, pretty good. I like it. See that being used quite a lot. And we have, let's see, 2 left, yeah. So Vanguard of the Rose is a 2 mana, 3/1 vampire. So obviously the vampire black and white deck. You can pay 1 mana to sacrifice another creature or artifact, and this gains indestructible till end of turn, and you tap it. So it's a bit like the, what's it, Guardian of New Benalia from Dominaria set, possibly. So 2 mana creature that can become indestructible if you want it to. You need other creatures or artifacts to sacrifice, but you might have something that produces that every turn, possibly. It's a 3/1, which is kind of okay. I think, yeah, it's a good card to have. It's nice that it's got good power. It's nice that it can become indestructible, because in theory it's quite easy to kill. If you give it -X, you can still kill it. Give it -1, toughness, rather than trying to destroy creature. So it's not indestructible entirely. There are ways to kill it, but it's nice to have that ability. It kind of means there's a good chance your opponents won't try to kill it or don't want to block it because they know you can make it indestructible. That's a nice aggressive card. And then we have Warden of the Inner Sky. This is a rare. It's a 1 mana 1/2 human soldier, which is okay. Then when it enters, as long as it let's say that again. As long as it has 3 or more counters on it, it also has flying and vigilance. So a 1 mana 1/2 flying vigilance is a lot better. But it needs to have 3 or more counters on it. Now you can tap 3 untapped artifacts or creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on this and scry 1, which can only be as a sorcery, which is nice. But then you'd have to do that probably over 3 turns to tap other artifacts and creatures. It can only be as a sorcery, so it has to be on your turn. These things are much better when you can do them at instant speed. The scry is okay. Putting a +1 counter on it is okay. It's good. So basically, if you get 3 +1 counters onto it, it's going to be a 4/5 flying vigilance soldier, which is nice. But it takes a while to get there. But also, it doesn't say that it needs to have 3 or more +1/+1 counters onto it. So if there are other ways of getting counters onto this, whether it's like oil counters or you can get other things like flying counters and first strike counters on it. So yeah, any other counters you can put on this will help it get to that point faster. It only has the increased power and toughness if you actually put +1 counters on it. So putting 3 oil counters on this will only make it a 1/2 flying vigilance. It's okay. I mean, it's a rare. It kind of feels like it should be uncommon, unless I'm missing something here. I guess over a longer time, this is going to be, a pretty decent threat, but it takes a while to get there. So maybe a slower, control-y kind of game means you're likely to get there. Or maybe in the red and white kind of, this is basically the red and white deck. You can tap other artifacts or creatures you control to put +1 counters on it. It's kind of slow, and red and white normally feels a bit more aggressive. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about this. It doesn't seem to be amazing, but I mean, I'd pick it. But it doesn't look like the most amazing thing ever. Okay, so that's all of the white cards in the set that we're going to have a look through. Now, I'm going to go over the my favorite uncommons or budget cards and my favorite rare or mythics of the set so far. I think my first favorite uncommon I really like is the Ruin Lurker Bat. So 1/1 flying lifelink for 1 mana is good. The ability to scry like every turn if you descend, which is kind of easy, especially in a black and white sacrifice style deck, which is what the vampire deck is like. I think you can get a lot of value from this, and it's only an uncommon, and it's hard to block, and it keeps you alive by gaining life. There's lots of things it does. So even though it's just a 1/1, I quite like the Ruin Lurker Bat. And the other one I really like is Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. I like how you can get quite a lot of value from it. You know, it's a 5 damage to something for 2 mana, which is nice, and the ability to craft it as well means you're going to get pretty decent relevant creature afterwards as well. So removal and a creature helps you, kind of regain your position if you're falling behind. So, and it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to do the 5 damage to target tapped creatures. You can tap one of their creatures themselves. They don't even have to attack with it. You can just tap them some other way, and you can kill a pretty, relatively big creature for pretty cheap, and then be able to transform it into something else big. I quite like the value you get from that. So we'll see if those cards get used very much, at least in drafting. In standard, I don't know, but in drafting, I think they would be really good. And then for the rares and the mythics, first one, Resplendent Angel. By far, I love angel cards, and this one, being able to make loads of extra angels, potentially like one on your turn, one on their turn, over and over again, is just incredible. So as long as you have some other way of getting lifelink, then this does huge things. So I love Resplendent Angel. And then obviously there's Get Lost. It's a really good removal spell. It's really cheap. It can do lots of things. And the map tokens, it can help out your opponent if they need them. But if they don't have creatures, then they're kind of mostly useless. So it's just an all-around great removal that's really cheap. So I think it's going to see a lot of play in standard in particular. We'll see. But yeah, it's definitely a good one. And then my last favorite rare or mythic from the set so far in white is Ojatak Deepest Foundation. I can't not like something that triples your creature tokens. There are a good few decks that I've used before that I really like that make lots of creature tokens, and this is just going to make it so much better. And there are ways of getting it from the from the graveyard to the battlefield relatively easy. Whenever anything costs 5 or 6 mana, or more than that, then there are ways to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield for 5 mana or less potentially. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of value we can get from that, especially considering that if they just kill it, it can potentially come back again. So it's really hard for them to deal with. And whether it's the most competitive thing or not, I don't know. I think it's going to be fun to play with, and that's kind of what I really care about in this game. I don't care if I'm the most competitive player ever, but I like to have fun with the cards I have, and I can't wait to pick this out from a draft, or open it in a pack, and get to play this. And if I don't, I'm going to be crafting it. Definitely going to be crafting this one. So that's all the white cards from the Ixalan set, which, breaks down pretty much the ones I think are interesting, ones that I think might not be that good, but we will see how it plays out when we get to play with these cards and we get to watch early access and get into drafting. I can't wait for it. So yeah, thanks for watching this video. Don't forget you can join the Game School Dad Discord community through Patreon for various bonus content. And we have our next giveaway in December is for a $25 digital gift card that you can use to give your account a boost of cards or other products from mtgacodes.com. So don't forget to check out the link to the Patreon Discord in the description here. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on future videos. So yeah, thanks for watching this one to the end, and I will see you in the next one.